Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. As some of you may have noticed, I did not make a video last week because we were moving to our new house we bought. And as everyone hopefully noticed, it means we have an actual backdrop now with like books and posters and things to look at besides my blank, boring bedroom walls from the old house. I have an actual office now, so that's kind of great. Just turned it into a little D&D video studio type thing. So another thing I wanted to talk about is after my Paladin video, which ended up being 58 minutes long, so I don't want to blame people if they didn't sit through the whole thing, I decided I'd go back to just making videos about each specific archetype, and I will probably make separate videos for spells, because I think the Paladin video was quite strong for the first half, but it just got too long. 58 minutes is ridiculous, and I think that I could probably make a video dealing with spell selections, and those could be their own videos, and I could really go into analysis of why I like certain spells or why I don't, instead of trying to just kind of, put everything together in one huge video. So today we're going to be dealing with the Hunter, and of the two that came with the player's handbook, I think Hunter is definitely the strongest. I'm still planning on making a Beastmaster video in the future. There's a lot of people who've had complaints about the Beastmaster, and I think some of those complaints have a lot of validity to them. So we'll look at that. I think that the Xanatar's choices are quite strong in general. We've had a couple Gloomstalkers in different campaigns of ours, and they've really brought a lot of damage. A lot. But I want to finish off looking at all the player's handbook options first, and then we'll move on to, Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide and Xanatar's. So when I think about the Hunter Ranger, and I think about different inspirations in like fantasy literature or mythology or things like that, obviously one of the first that comes to mind is Aragorn from the Lord of the Rings, who is actually, according to the actual game creators, the inspiration for the Ranger class. Although it's kind of funny that when you think about Strider or Aragorn and him being a ranger, Legolas seems more what today's people think of the ranger class, even though he was never actually called ranger. But I think that those are two interesting archetypes when we look at class and consider how we want to go forward with it. Because really that comes down to the most fundamental choice of playing a ranger. Do you want to be a melee guy or do you want to be a bow guy? Because that choice will pretty much determine the way you play the character, and a lot of your subsequent choices will all follow from that. Aside from Aragorn and Legolas, by the way, just as a quick aside, I've always hated Legolas ever since I started playing World of Warcraft back in the day, because I was a Horde player, and every time I did Battlegrounds, and I did a lot of Battlegrounds, I was a PvP guy mostly, you'd have like 3 Legolases in one Battleground. And in order to get past the name filter, they'd all spell it with, 2 E's or 3 G's or, 4 O's, 3 L's, a couple A's, and 4 S's at the end. And while I took great pleasure in killing all these Legolases or Legolases, it was pretty annoying. That wasn't the character's fault, that's not Tolkien's fault. It's just, a symbol of what Legolas was kind of becoming pulp culture, I guess. Obviously, you've got guys like Dritz, of course, from the Forgotten Realm books, one of the most famous D&D rangers of all time. I think Jelt from The Witcher is also a good choice. He calls himself a monster hunter, and monster hunter is one of the Xanatar's player options for the ranger subclasses, and that kind of fits with that like hunter, stalker of beasts. He does do a lot of carries multiple swords on his back, sometimes uses 2-handers, sometimes uses 2 1-handers. I think Gerald uses a lot of magic as well, although granted a lot of it's alchemy type stuff, but still, he uses magic and he fights with multiple weapons. I think that Jon Snow, actually, and all the members of the Night's Watch would be a good choice for rangers and for inspiration there. They refer to themselves as ranging beyond the wall all the time. They're trackers and they're like wilderness survival type guys. And unlike, say, like druids, of course, they are clearly a more martial bent on the wilderness type take. And obviously from, our own mythology or real life, depending on how you look at it, you've got guys like Robin Hood and his band of merry men, who, in my opinion, are clearly rangers for the most part. I mean, sure, Friar Tuck might have been a cleric and Eleanor Dale's a bard, but for the most part, they were rangers. Living in the woods, living off the land, clearly more martial bent as well, outlaws, mostly using bows and stuff like that. Pretty clear rangers, in my opinion. So, I think anytime you're making a character who wants to be like bounty hunter, beast master types, then rangers are a pretty strong choice. And of course, if you're making an archer, ranger is also a very strong choice as well for any, bow user types. For races, obviously variant human, I mention it every video, variant human's just kind of good at everything. The bonus feat, of course, is great. Although, it's worth noting that at higher levels, the bonus feat doesn't really matter so much anymore. Everybody else usually has, enough chance to max out all their stats and then pick up feats that they want. So it's less of a big deal if your campaign's going to high level. But at low level, a bonus feat is awesome. So, how do you go wrong with that? Anybody who gives you bonuses to your dex is going to be strong. Anyone who gives you bonuses to your dex and your wisdom is obviously going to be pretty much a perfect choice. So Wood Elf, including, with bonus extra movement is nice. You have advantages or some nice feats like Elven Advantage. And if you're going to be doing a lot of hiding and trying to snipe people from concealment, then giving yourself 3 dice to hit with is even better than giving yourself 2 dice to hit with. So I think that Wood Elves make an excellent choice. You've also got some nice racial traits with Elf as well, like Fey ancestries and whatnot. Another choice, though, which nobody at my table has actually tried yet, which is unfortunate, but which I personally think is excellent, is the Stout Halfling. They've got the +2 to your dex, +1 to your wisdom, same as the Wood Elf. Granted, you have less movement, not more, but if you're using a bow, that's not really as big of a concern. And they've got some pretty nice racial feats as well, including, of course, Halfling Luck, which is amazing. But like I said, there's tons of other strong choices as well. Anybody who's going to give you, dex or wisdom or both is probably worth using. I do think, though, that it's worth pointing out that rangers don't rely on wisdom as much as paladins, for example, do on charisma. So that's not to say that you shouldn't prioritize wisdom on a ranger as like a secondary stat. But I think that leaving your wisdom at like 14 to 16 is probably all right. A paladin is not only getting their spell casting from charisma, they're also getting their auras. They might be getting other things as well, like a lot of them have, like if you went Oath of Conquest, you might be trying to use a lot of fear effects, which are going to key off your charisma. And I think that in general, paladins are kind of forced into committing a lot more to it, whereas say like the ranger, while also being a hybrid, much like the paladin, doesn't really need it as much. A lot of your best spells are things like Hunter's Mark, Pass Without Trace, conjuring different woodland animals and whatnot, and none of that requires you to have any wisdom really. So I don't think it's as important for the ranger as it is on, say, the paladin or a pure caster for that matter. I wanted to talk about favorite enemies a little bit. Favorite enemies is kind of weird because I remember back in like 1st and 2nd edition, favorite enemies was kind of a big deal, I mean, you got some fairly hefty bonuses against them. It's not quite as strong now as it used to be, but it's still worth talking about. I think if you have a chance to know what your campaign is going to be and kind of metagame things a bit, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with, making some choices along those lines. And I think as long as you talk to your DM about it first, he'll probably be cool with it too. If you take, say Drow as your, Drow elves as your enemy, and then you're fighting a campaign where you never meet Drow elves, it kind of sucks, So I think that, as long as you talk to him first and say, hey, I know we're doing Out of the Abyss, and we're going to be fighting a lot of Drow elves, would it be okay if I took them? Or we're going to be doing Storm King's Thunder, and I know we're going to be fighting a lot of giants. Is it cool if I take giants as my favorite enemy? And, I think most DMs are going to be fairly accommodating with that. in general, I think that undead is one of the best choices you can make. Because whether you're level 1 fighting skeletons and zombies, or level 20 and you're fighting, like liches and Dracoliches and Demi-liches and anything else that ends in lich, then it's always going to be relevant. At any point in your career, you can be fighting undead. They're pretty common, and there's a lot of them, and some of them are pretty powerful. So I think that's one that will never really go to waste. But again, you might be in a campaign where you don't fight any undead at all. So, I think there's nothing wrong with talking to your DM. If you just spring on your DM, he might think it's kind of lame that you chose fiends when you knew that you were going to be doing a campaign and fighting nothing but demons and devils. But, if you talk to him first, he'll probably be cool. So now for the hunter specifically. And the main thing with the hunter is you're going to have different level ranges where you get a group of abilities and you get to choose one from that group, and that's going to kind of shape your character. And really, a lot of that is going to be shaped by that first basic choice I mentioned, which is, am I going to be a melee guy or am I going to be a ranged guy? And everything's going to really stem from that choice. Because some of the levels, like say choosing volley or whirlwind, those choices are going to be really obvious. Others, maybe a little less so, but in general, you're just going to want to be good at what you want to do. And, there's no point taking volley if you're going to be using 2 swords the whole time, Obviously, the choice of a fighting style is also going to kind of key from this as well. If you're going to be using a bow, you might as well take archery. That's going to be the best choice you can make. +2 to hit is always going to be valuable. Whereas, taking 2 up and fighting, if you're using a bow, is not going to be as valuable. If you think you're going to be using a bit of both and you're not really sure which way you want to go yet, then taking something like the defensive fighting style is perfectly fine, I think. But in general, this is a choice that's going to shape your character, and you should probably know in advance kind of which way you want to go. So anyways, for the actual abilities themselves, at level 3, you're going to have a choice between Colossus Slayer, Giant Killer, and Horde Breaker. Colossus Slayer is really good at low levels. Gives you just a bunch of extra damage to your attacks. Something's already been wounded, and it's pretty competitive with a lot of other attack bonuses. You can use it with things like, say, Hunter's Mark to up your damage even more, and it's a really, really strong choice at low levels. My only complaint about Colossus Slayer is that it doesn't really scale. It's always going to be that extra D8 damage, and compared to things like, say, like Sneak Attack obviously scales forever, but even just an extra attack per round is going to benefit from your dex bonuses, magic item bonuses. If you have something that does damage on hits, like say a Flame Tongue or a Frost Brand, then that's all going to scale up, whereas your Colossus Slayer is just not going to. But that's fine. It's still a great ability, especially at low levels, like I say. But it's not bad at high levels either. It's always going to be pretty relevant. Giant Killer, again, this is going to be more for a melee focus. Well, this one's going to be specifically melee focus, as opposed to Colossus Slayer, which could be either. It uses your reaction, but it's still pretty good. It's going to give you, if somebody attacks you, you can use your reaction to attack back. And the nice thing about it is, it doesn't matter if they hit or miss, they just have to target you with the attack, and then you can use your reaction to attack back. It does use your reaction, which is the only problem here, and you might have other things that compete with that, but maybe you don't, and in which case, it's an excellent choice to up your action economy and to boost up your damage a lot more too. Final choice is Horde Breaker, and I should point out that I've been in a couple campaigns, one which went to 18 with a ranger, another one which went to 20 with a ranger. And we had a melee ranger that went to 20, and the ranged ranger went to 18. The bow ranger chose Horde Breaker, and in my opinion, it was probably the best of these 3 abilities. It was almost always relevant. It's very easy to find 2 enemies within 5 feet of each other. So he was able to use it a lot, and because you're using a bow, it's not like you have to have guys grouped up on you in melee range in order to use it. You can just pick guys out from anywhere, and there's probably going to be multiple options to use it in any given combat. The only time it sucks is when you're fighting like say, a boss fight where that's all you have, like maybe you're fighting a dragon and there's nothing else, well, now Horde Breaker doesn't do you any good at all. But overall, it's still a pretty strong ability. All of them are just going to be trade-offs. There's no like best choice, I wouldn't necessarily say. Well, I mean, there's probably some choices that are better than others, but there's no one choice that's a clear winner, in my opinion. Like I said, it's all trade-offs, not really a win-win or a lose-lose. Level 7, you've got Escape the Horde, where you can give disadvantage to opponents that try to attack you on opportunity attacks. Obviously, this is going to be great if you're planning on running around in combat a lot, in like melee range especially, where you're going to be getting up a lot of opportunity attacks. Now they have disadvantage to hit you. Multi-attack defense is obviously going to be more of a melee focused ability as well. Anybody who has multiple attacks against you, these subsequent attacks, you have a plus 40 armor class. There's advantages and disadvantages to each of these. Escape the Horde doesn't really help you much if you're not going to be repositioning yourself a lot in combat and not giving up a lot of opportunity attacks. Multi-attack defense, which in my opinion is probably the stronger of those two abilities, but it only helps against things that have multiple attacks around. And a lot of times you're fighting stuff that has maybe one really powerful attack and one less powerful attack, or only one attack. Or maybe you fight using a lot of spells and spell-like abilities, in which case multi-attack defense isn't doing anything in those situations. But still, I think that things with multiple attacks around are common enough that it's going to be pretty helpful throughout your career. The third one is Steel Will, which gives you advantage versus being frightened. It's worth pointing out that Halflings already had that if you took the Stout Halfling choice that I mentioned earlier. But I think it's a good default choice if you're not going to be in melee a lot. If you're going to be a ranged guy, you don't really need to worry about opportunity attacks, and you're probably not going to be getting hit so often in one round that you need to worry about multi-attack defense either. So it's a pretty good default choice for someone who's like, yeah, I don't really need these two, I'll take that one. And frightened effects are common enough that having advantage against it is probably going to be a good thing. You're also going to have, usually frightened effects are going to be a wisdom save, and because you have proficiency on wisdom saves, and at least some wisdom, we're going to assume, advantage means that you're almost never going to be frightened. You should be pretty strong against it. At level 11, you have the choice of Volley or Whirlwind. And Volley is obviously the clear-cut winner if you're using a bow. Whirlwind is the winner if you're in melee. There's not really much more to be said about it. That choice is pretty clear-cut. At level 15, you have the choice of Evasion, Stand Against Tide, and Uncanny Dodge. Evasion is basically just like every other class that gets evasion, although you are getting it a little later than a lot of other classes would, like rogues get it much earlier than you, for example. But that's okay because you are a hybrid and you're more, you have a lot more hit points than a rogue will generally because you have a D10. So, I think that it's a pretty good ability in general. Reducing the amount of damage you're taking is not a bad thing. Uncanny Dodge uses your reaction to have the damage against the attack. It's pretty good as well. I think that it's probably better if you're, worried about getting hit by like a lot of melee attacks. Evasion's pretty strong as well. Stand Against the Tide is probably the least powerful of the three. I think it's my least favorite choice out of the bunch. But really none of them are terrible choices. I probably like Evasion better, but like I said, Uncanny Dodge isn't bad either. It's a shame that it uses your reaction because you might already have other things that use your reaction as well. But again, if you don't, then, it's there. It's pretty solid. Having the damage from an attack can be pretty handy, especially if you get like crit or something like that. Then, it's pretty good. As far as feats go, obviously if you're using a bow, Sharpshooter is one of the best feats you can take. It's amazing. And one of the nice things about bows, like when I compare Sharpshooter versus Great Weapon Mastery, for example, I generally find that they're fairly equivalent, but the nice thing about Sharpshooter is that because you can take the archery fighting style, because you can get magical bows and magical arrows, it means that you can start stacking those hit bonuses a lot more than a Great Weapon Fighter could. and it makes it a lot easier to overcome that -5 to hit penalty. So it's a lot, it's just a lot more economical to be able to use sharpshooter, I find. Unfortunately, it doesn't give you the bonus action attack that Great Weapon Mastery does on a crit or a killing blow, but the fact that you can ignore up to 3/4 cover is pretty handy as well. And in general, I find that sharpshooter is pretty good. The other thing is, and I kind of alluded to this on the Paladin video, that the more damage you do on average in one hit, the less the +10 to your damage really matters. So if you're doing say 20 damage per hit on average with a great weapon, well, that +10 is now giving you an extra 1.5 times as much damage. But in general, bows hit less hard than great weapons. You're using a D6 or a D8 instead of 2d6 or a D12, and so you're just generally not doing as much, which means that sharpshooter is going to add more to your damage. It's not usually going to be a third of your damage like it might have been in the previous example. It could easily be half your damage. I mean, it could literally double the damage you're doing on a lot of hits or close to it, which means that sharpshooter is going to be almost always worth taking on a guy with a bow, in my opinion. If you have multiple attacks, sharpshooter is good. I also like, and this is one I've referred to a lot as well, alert, because if you're going to be kind of like the scout guy for your group and you're going to be ranging on ahead to scout for enemies, you don't want to get ambushed. If you're going to be separated from your party, you can't afford to get attacked when you're by yourself. And alert is going to really help with that, because now you can't be surprised as long as you're conscious. Plus, the +5 to your initiative in general is going to be pretty handy for you, because the way that ranged versus melee works, I really like alert on ranged guys, because a lot of times you might not want to run into the combat right away as a melee guy in case your casters are hoping to use a lot of AoE attacks. But with a bow, it's not really going to matter. You're not going to be disrupting your party formation. You're not going to be really changing anything like that. You're not going to be, interfering with a wizard's fireball. You just shoot a guy and then the wizard can still fireball, and it's fine. So the higher initiative in that case is not going to hurt. Although granted, you will have probably high initiative anyways, you're going to have high dex, but nothing wrong with that. I've mentioned lucky a lot as well. Lucky's one of the best general feats in the game in my opinion, and I really like the idea of combining the lucky halfling trait with the lucky feat. Although I don't know why they gave them both the same name. That's why I always call it halfling luck, because I want to differentiate between them. But in the book, it just calls it lucky. So I don't know. Terrible decision there. But anyways, lucky's always great, giving you a chance to reroll failed saving throws. If you get crit, you can force the DM to reroll the attack roll against you, or even if you don't crit. But I especially like it when you do get crit. And reroll your own attacks. Sometimes you just really needed to hit, and maybe you rolled a 2. I would say a 1, but if you want Stout Halfling, you can reroll that anyways. But you rolled a 2 and you missed, and you're like, now he's gonna get to go, and now he's gonna kill us all with his, terrible spell he's about to cast. So maybe I will just reroll that and finish him off. In which case, that's a great choice. I mentioned Elven Advantage earlier. If you're gonna be using a lot of concealment on your ranger and you think that you can hide a lot, then Elven Advantage is going to be a great feat as well, although obviously you have to be an elf or half-elf to use it. And then things like Resilient Con is a pretty strong choice as well, or even, I don't think you really need Warcaster as much. Resilient Con will probably do the trick, because Constitution is always good, but you will be casting spells. You might want to be able to maintain concentration on things like, say, Hunter's Mark, and being able to pass those concentration saving throws will be pretty handy. If you're a melee ranger, the priority on that feat, or either of those feats, goes way up. If you're using a bow, it's not as important, but I'd still consider it once you've maxed out your dex and took sharpshooter. But if you're not using melee, then you don't need, or if you're not using a bow, you don't need sharpshooter, in which case you can take Warcaster or Resilient Con a lot earlier. Obviously, there's some decent racial feats as well. I already mentioned Open Accuracy, But, like things like Prodigy and Halfling's got a few good ones as well. I can't even remember them all right now. I'm blanking on them, but that's okay. They have some good ones too. So any of those, just take a look at what you think you're going to be using, and make your own decisions from there. But those are my top picks, anyways. I wanted to mention really quickly a few different build ideas, and one of them I mentioned earlier when I was talking about rogues, but that's the idea of multi-classing. Instead of saying rogue combined with fighter, rogue combined with ranger. And I really like this combination a lot too, because now it gives you the option of using spells, things like Pass Without Trace. If you take 5 levels of ranger, now you're getting a second attack around, which means that if you miss with your first attack, you can still attack a second time and try to get in the big sneak attack damage, which is where most of your damage is going to come from. You're also getting, like I said, Pass Without Trace, which is going to make you the stealthiest thing on Earth, because now you're a rogue with Pass Without Trace. And getting things like Hunter's Mark is not bad on a rogue either. It's going to be more of a rogue-focused build if you go this way, but I still like it. I would definitely take ranged rogue in this case, and I would probably take Horde Breaker at level 3, because then if I miss with my first attack, and I don't have a second attack around yet, I can try to get another attack with my Horde Breaker, and hopefully, as long as I have an ally within 5 feet, which, not necessarily guaranteed, but hopefully you do, then I can still hopefully get in that sneak attack damage. And like I said, adding in some spells is not a bad thing as well, and adding some damage from Hunter's Mark kind of helps to compensate for not having as big of a sneak attack because you multi-classed. Gloomstalker's another good one, because Gloomstalkers are pretty good, and you get that bonus extra damage on your first attack in the combat, which is pretty handy as well. But we'll talk about that in the Gloomstalker video. So that's one I really like. I also like the idea of combining the Ranger with things like Druid and just getting even more spell casting while still having the ability to attack twice around. This one would be more of a melee focused build for me, where I'm trying to take advantage of the second attack the Ranger has. I'd probably want to use things like maybe multi-attack defense, even if I'm going to be using bear forms, or animal forms I should say, because a lot of the animal forms have pretty weak armor class. That's kind of the one problem with them. But being able to boost it with my Ranger is not a bad thing either. Having some levels with a D10 for hit dice isn't bad. And, things like Colossus Slayer or Giant Killer would be pretty handy as well. Especially when you're using a lot of temporary hit points, Giant Killer becomes a lot more practical, because now somebody attacks you, you can just use your reaction and attack them back. And it's not really so dire if you're getting hit, because you've got a fairly large pool of temporary hit points as well. And of course, it can augment your spell casting. In this case, you're going to have to prioritize your wisdom more, because of course that's going to be your prime stat for your druids, but that's okay as well. Obviously, as far as pure ranger builds go, like I said, you have to make a choice between melee and ranged combat. You can try to do the jack of all trades type, the hybrid who does everything, and I think you can be fairly successful with that as well. But someone like a champion fighter who gets the second fighting style is probably going to be better suited for this. You've only got the one fighting style unless you decide to multi-class into, like, say, fighter in order to get another one. And, you're probably better off going all in and just saying, you know what, I'm using a bow, that's what I'm going to do. Or I'm using 2 weapons or whatever. So I'm going to wrap things up. I just wanted to make one final kind of comment about ranged versus melee combat in general. And this is something that I saw from our own experiences playing with high-level rangers, one which went melee and one which went ranged. And that is that ranged combat will almost always get to attack, and melee combat might not. There's going to be a lot of times when the fight starts and you're not within melee range, and you have to spend the first round dashing, or maybe even the first 2 rounds dashing, or whatever. Whereas the guy with the bow will always be able to get his attacks in, he'll always be able to get damage. And I mean, if he's out of range, then the melee guy's certainly out of range, in which case it becomes a moot point anyways, and it doesn't matter. The guy with the bow will always be able to get in his attacks though, and the guy with the swords might not. And this became very apparent to me as I watched two different players playing different rangers and different campaigns. While the melee guy was probably actually the stronger character at low levels, even by the time we'd reached like level 5 or so, the guy with the bow was really starting to shine and was doing a lot of damage. And once he had a chance to pick up feats like sharpshooter, the damage just kept going up and up and up. And things like horde breaker, volley, all these things just gave him opportunities to attack more and more, and do more damage, and he didn't have to care about range. And once he had sharpshooter, he didn't have to worry about cover that much either. You know, unless something had full cover, he was good to go. And you can do all the pen and paper analysis you want. You can try to break things down and say, well, you know, if the character has enough hit points that I can cast Hunter's Mark in the first round, and then from subsequent rounds I can dual wield and I'm getting extra attacks in with Hunter's Mark, whereas the bow guy isn't being able to do that because even if he has Horde Breaker, he has to target a different target. You know, if he has, he could just use a bow on the one guy, but then he's only getting 2 attacks, whereas the dual wielder is getting 3. But honestly, I don't think it really mattered much. From actual played experience, the bow just really outshone the melee guy. And I'm not saying don't play a melee ranger. I think that they're really cool and you can have a lot of fun with them. And I think that if you kind of built it with like things like Giant Killer and trying to use your reactions a lot to boost your damage even further, I think they can be quite strong. The other nice thing about the melee guy is it's usually easier to get good melee weapons than it is to get good ranged weapons. So you could start getting things like Flame Tongues and Frost Brands and stuff like that, which will boost your on-hit damage a lot more. And the bow guy might not have as easy a time of doing that. So there's definitely advantages and disadvantages to both. The other nice thing is that sometimes you just need extra guys up front. So I'm not saying don't play a melee ranger. I think melee rangers are actually really cool. But if you're looking from a pure damage standpoint, the bow guy will probably out damage him. And that's just what I've seen from my own experience, having high level rangers in multiple parties. The bow is always going to be useful. It's always going to be effective. You know, as long as they're in range, you're going to be able to shoot. And a lot of combats don't start within 30 or 35 feet. And so you can't always get there. Oh, I should have mentioned mobility under feats as well, especially if you're playing a melee ranger. Mobility is an excellent choice as well. Ups your damage, or ups your movement, which allows you to get into combat. I think like a wood elf with mobility is pretty solid. You know, you've got a lot of movement on that guy now. But yeah, that's kind of my closing thoughts, is that, you know, the guy with the bow will always get to be able to shoot stuff. The guy with the swords might or might not be able to just stab somebody. He might have to run up and try to get to somebody. So, you know, keep that in mind. Take that for what it's worth. But at the end of the day, it's your decision. Play whatever you think is going to be fun. If you're like, man, I really had my heart set on playing a melee ranger until some random guy on the internet said that melee sucks and bows are always the way to go 100% of the time. Well, then, you know, disregard what I said and play what you want to play, because that's what you're probably going to enjoy and that's what's going to be fun for you. So that's just my opinion, but thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.